Kate Mila-Falcher. Welcome back to Irish Granny Helen. This is our Saturday book. Today we're doing Frame Up by Andy Edmonds, The Untold Story of Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, but we don't call him Fatty. This is video number 2. So let's just move forward from where we left off on video number 1. This is chapter 4, and he is singing and has star billing at a nice hotel in Long Beach. And just to remind everybody, at the time, Long Beach was not connected to Los Angeles by endless freeways the way it is today. It was way out there, far, south, and not part of LA at all. I remember, well, it's not part of the book. I remember when Anaheim, where Disneyland is, was all dairy farms and orchards. There was no Disneyland, or Disneyland was so new it was small. I don't remember Disneyland at all. I remember going to visit family friends who were dairymen, who were from Ireland, who worked on the dairy farms in Anaheim. Yeah. Anaheim was in the country, and when you started to approach, you smelled cow manure. That's my first memories of Anaheim. Okay, chapter 4. Okay, one of the ways that he got a job, this is interesting. He was always beautifully dressed. He very much put attention to the quality and style of the clothes that he wore. You could tell that in the pictures. He always looked really nicely dressed. And he was a gentleman. So he got a job by offering to help a young woman to get her case onto the train. And she said, "I can handle it myself." And he got all embarrassed. And she told him, "I don't like fat men and I don't like blondes." Who could tell? Apparently he was a blonde. But they ended up talking, and she was going to perform with the same group at the same hotel in Long Beach. And this was his future wife, Minta Durfee. She was kind of a snit to him. It's not very pleasant. But there was an instant attraction. So this is one story out of 5 versions that Minta told until she died about how they met. She said she was shocked when he started to sing and heard that he had a beautiful tenor voice, and she fell in love with him when he sang his first song on stage. It's so romantic. So afterwards, she found him on a bench at the beach, and she sought him out. She felt badly, and she praised him effusively and then scolded him for wasting his talents. What are you doing in a hotel in Long Beach? And this would continue with their relationship, this kind of give and take. He wasn't sure if she was mad or was she encouraging him. He couldn't tell. And this was a continual problem with them. They had problems communicating. She told him, "You should be acting in New York City. You're that talented." So after many post-show conversations, he suggested they team up on stage as sweethearts, and they weren't yet. And so their relationship played out on stage because he courted her on stage before a live audience. He was very shy, but somehow being on stage, he changed. When the show eventually ended, Minta planned to go to San Francisco. On her last night in Long Beach in Los Angeles, he proposed to her. And on August 6th, 1908, the theater was made into a country chapel. And I think, remember I couldn't read the date and I thought 1926 cannot be correct. It wasn't. That wasn't a 2. It was a sloppy 0. 1906 is when he formed the group with the 2 other guys, and they went to Idaho and Alaska, and the rest is history. In 1908, they got married. The theater company turned the stage and the theater into a country chapel. And the wedding began with Roscoe singing a love song. And there was 5 minutes of applause before he could even begin. They had a 12-piece orchestra. This is amazing. The wedding gifts were displayed under a big heart in the window of Butham's department store in Long Beach. I guess this is a thing people did. He took a lot of teasing about his weight and the wedding night, and they took a week off. He was so embarrassed because friends told him, hey, we'll be able to tell what you've been up to. So the whole concept, just, he was just horrified. The idea of a honeymoon was only for the ultra-rich until way past the late 1920s. It was not a thing that regular people did. They got a job with a stock company in San Bernardino, which at the time was a desert town in the middle of nowhere. But Minta got sick. She got pleurisy. Unknown to her, he signed this contract for himself while they were in Long Beach, and after their marriage, he renegotiated to get her into the show, and he just wasn't used to making decisions as a couple. He had always been alone, and it was difficult for him to understand that a marriage was supposed to be give and take in a working relationship. So that caused stress. He was not used to making decisions with anyone else. He'd been alone since childhood, and his secrecy, which was really just his not knowing how to communicate, was a sore point in their marriage. He did not know how to talk to people about personal stuff. Minta was hurt, and she was mad, and she refused to go just to test him. He went without her. So her mother, she went back home to her mother, and her mother insisted that they never work it out. Excuse me, they'd never work out their issues. They didn't do it together, and she needed to go back and meet him and work with him. So she eventually took the train and met him in Bisbee, Arizona, which was a cowboy town. I think it might still be. And he was delighted to see her, and the show was a big success. However, this is one of the issues. Roscoe had difficulty. He had mood swings. He would drink too much and would get a temper when he drank. It was like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde personality. Minta didn't know that his father had been even more extreme. He wasn't abusive and violent like his father. But she didn't know that there was this two extremes of personality almost inherited. So chapter 5, Minta blamed her absence for the emotional gap between them, and he didn't communicate. She didn't know. So this is a quote from her when the author talked to her. Roscoe was the most gentle man I'd ever known. Everyone loved him, such a dear soul. When he sang on stage, it was just as if he reached into the heart of every man and woman in the audience. He just had this kind way about him. I told you, when I looked at that picture of him, I was just struck by what was in his eyes. He was always very funny to strangers and audiences. Around me, Minta, he was not the clown he was on stage. He was very sensitive, and then he started drinking and he changed. He became dour and would pick fights with me, argue about anything, and then storm out. A changed man. Everyone drank, so no one really thought much about it in those days. They didn't really associate these moods with the alcohol or with trauma from his background. So Minta had a miscarriage, and he was disappointed. He thought it was his fault, and he blamed himself for every bad thing that ever happened, because why wouldn't he? That's how he was treated as a child. He became aloof and sullen at home and would not be intimate with her. Something was broken in their relationship by that separation when he left and she went to her mother's. Anyway, the show that they were in traveled to Texas, and there's a funny story about him getting stuck in a Murphy bed. One of those beds that flips up. People have died. It's not that funny, but it was a funny story. In El Paso, they were picnicking at a river, and they were accosted by Mexican revolutionaries. This is a true story. This is unreal. And Pancho Villa was one of them. And they started talking with him. They're having a picnic, and on the other side of the river is Pancho Villa and his men. And they started throwing food back and forth, like, here, you try this, and then we'll get some of yours. And this actually inspired a food fight in the movie Duck Soup with the Marx Brothers, because it kind of degenerated, but it was done in good humor. Roscoe claimed it was the first picture ever, the first pie ever thrown in public. He invented pie throwing with Pancho Villa. This is actually true. He was the one who came up with that trope of a pie in the face, throwing pies at people. And he got the idea from when they were having the picnic and they threw a pie to Pancho Villa. And just an unbelievable story, but it's apparently it's true. So he's the one who introduced the idea of pie throwing to Mack Sennett, the Keystone Cops. Weirdly, Roscoe later became an outlaw, and Pancho Villa went into the movies. He was offered a movie about the revolution, but he couldn't settle down and behave himself and stick to the set. He was always, showing off, and he didn't cooperate, and the film just sort of fell apart. But ironically enough, Roscoe's up in San Francisco being tried. Pancho Villa's making a movie. I guess, who knew? Roscoe was making a name for himself, but he was tired. He had been hustling stage work for 15 years, and he was only 22. Movie making began to move west. Now, before this, movies were on the East Coast. There was no Hollywood land. There was no movie industry in California. And for various reasons, they moved. The weather on the West Coast was more amenable. So they didn't have the technology to light sound stages like they do now. So, and they made so many things all at the same time, they needed quick, small stage settings. That's why the stage settings in silent movies are kind of flimsy, and you can tell that they're not real permanent rooms and stuff, unless they did them on site, which they sometimes did on location. So they're trying to make movies on the East Coast, and it's bad weather. They couldn't make them in the winter. It was too cold. They couldn't make them during storms. They couldn't, it was just problematic. And they were told, come to California, it's paradise. And I'm getting hiccups, sorry. It proved to be a good decision, because the weather allowed them to do open sets. So a set would be a floor and 3 walls, and then the open end where they would film, and they would just put fabric over the roofs. So the East Coast started to get flooded with ads to come west. Some East Coast film companies found out that the claims that were being made about California and the weather were true, and so they started moving out west. A Chicago-based company lured Roscoe to film one-reel dramas and comedies. Now, up until here, he'd been a stage actor, a vaudeville actor. He didn't really know about movie making. That's very different. So the company was based in Chicago. The studio was in Glendale. Glendale, it's near Echo Park, and it was called Eden Glen or something like that first. It wasn't called Glendale to begin with at the time, but it's near Echo Park, and off he went to the studio. Also there was the Bison Studios, and Bison eventually became Mack Sennett Studios with Keystone Studios, with the Keystone Cops, all the cops running around, jumping off the cars and all that. Movie actors were called players, and they were held in lowest regard. They were considered vermin, even by stage actors. Movie actors were the lowest of the low. Many of the boarding houses in LA would say, no actors, no dogs. So most performers took film jobs on the sly because the money was good. They could get $5 a day. And most of them failed as stage actors, or there weren't enough positions and they couldn't get a job, so they'd get a movie job and they made good money. Early silent films, they didn't necessarily mention who the actors were. They didn't get a film credit. And this was intentional. It kept them humble. It kept them in line. And also, nobody knew their secret, which is how it attracted people to come and act, is nobody knew who they were. That's just as well, because they were regarded as, quasi-criminal. Roscoe was desperate for a job, and he took the job from the company centered in Chicago as an extra in a one-reeler, like a one, the cans of film, the one-reeler, for a guy called Selig, who was in the company for a short time and eventually got a permanent job with Keystone. So he started out doing this one-reeler for a guy called Selig, but eventually he got a permanent job with Keystone. He got kind of friendly with Max Sennett. Minta never knew until after his death about the Selig job, and he also had a very brief job with the Nestor company. She never knew because it was so unimportant and so brief that he didn't even talk about it. He didn't put it on his resume and didn't even tell his wife. Eventually, he got a starring role in a company in San Francisco, the Ferris Hartman Company, and he was glad to get out of Los Angeles and go to San Francisco. But then he made a mistake. The show was sent to Chicago, and it didn't do well. It closed after 2 shows. Roscoe and Minta worked one-night stands called pickups on the return trip to Los Angeles. So in order to make money and pay for their trip back from Chicago to LA, they'd stay in a place overnight, take the train, stay in a place overnight, and they would just do whatever needed to be done in a theater for that one night. They moved in with her parents, who loved Roscoe, and it helped their marriage. It was the stability. His mood improved, and he almost quit alcohol completely. His in-laws loved him and always took his side. Not a good thing. Minta got sick of it and asked for a job for them and asked for a job with the company. And the Ferris Hartman Hawaii company hired them to take a tour of the Orient in the light opera Gilbert and Sullivan's Mikado. They were very apprehensive about going to Asia and then performing Asian roles. The Mikado is, Asian. But they began in America with, they began with an American audience in China. An American oil executive audience came to see the Mikado, and they loved them. So they did a command performance for the Dowager Empress of China and was very well received by her and therefore by the public. But Roscoe started going out drinking every night after the show with the boys. And he was the life of the party until he got back to the hotel and Minta, and then he was belligerent. And, we're talking childhood trauma 101 here. After 1.5 years of touring Asia, one night he turned on Minta, told her that she destroyed his life by forcing him to leave the United States for slave wages. He told her that the problems that they had were not enough money in their contract, that he was carrying the show and not paid much more than the rest of the cast, and he was offended that he wasn't making more. She got him a raise. She was really good at negotiating. She got him a raise, but his Jekyll and Hyde moods continued. Their last stop was Manila. He got a virus, and he lost his voice. He couldn't go on. He had no understudy. He was sick, and the show was shut down for 3 weeks. No show, no pay. But Hartman, the boss of the company, he paid Roscoe without paying everybody else. And so the whole entire crew, the rest of them ostracized him. They resented it. He was anxious to go back to San Francisco. She was anxious to go back to Los Angeles, and they compromised, which, they lived in Santa Barbara. No, I'm kidding. They sailed to Northern California, and they took the sightseeing train to Los Angeles. So they spent a little time in the north, and then they went down to Los Angeles. They were greeted by her parents. Roscoe was overwhelmed by this family affection. Like, what is this? They're happy to see us, and they're not, mistreating us, and I don't know what to make of it, right? He was bitter about vaudeville because of the last part of the trip when he was sick in Manila, and he was not used to anything less than total admiration and affection, and to have the crew mad at him and not be performing, he couldn't handle it. He withdrew, sulking, kind of, it's worse than sulking, but that's a description, while Minta got a bit part in the chorus of a local theater, and they got sporadic money and low pay. After several months, Roscoe turned to film because he was desperate for money, and he had felt previously it was beneath him. It was humiliating and loathsome to be in films. He heard that Selig was looking for a woman, so he dressed up in drag and applied, and he got the job. He did Alas, Poor Yorick. This was his first unfilmed role as a woman. He also got jobs with the Nestor Company and Universal Film Companies, but those were minor, so minor he never talked about them. He became fascinated by the cameras, the sets, the lights, the makeup, the pantomime. Like I said before, he learned every aspect of filmmaking, which served him well later. He missed the live audience, but he got into the mechanics of filmmaking, kind of made up for it. He took a fateful streetcar, and a guy in the streetcar told him, hey, I don't know where you're going, you're all dressed up, but there's a shindig at the end of the line in Edendale. This is Glendale, Edendale. And check it out. So he rode the streetcar to the end of the line and got out, and lo and behold, he emerges from the streetcar, and in front of him is the studio of the Keystone studio of Max Sennett and the Keystone Cops. Chapter 6. One fake story about how Roscoe met Max Sennett was from the mayor of Portland, Oregon, a guy called A. Rushlight. This was a made-up story to make this guy sound like he knew people. He said that Roscoe was a plumber's assistant, and he didn't like working, and he made faces at passers-by, and he got a stage job because of that in 1913, and he called Roscoe utterly hopeless on stage. None of that is true. Sennett had 2 stories. You decide. The first one was that some fat plumber's assistant would be perfect for the role, and he also could do somersaults, so he gave him the job. But that's not really what happened. Then we have this other story. So let me read you this. I think this sounds probably plausible. So Arbuckle walked up to him and flippantly introduced himself and said, "The name's Arbuckle, Roscoe Arbuckle. Call me Fatty." So we know this is not entirely true because he never liked that name. "I'm a funny man and an acrobat. Bet I could do good in pictures. What do you think?" This is suspect because he was far, far too shy to put off such a bold move. He detested the nickname. He never used it, never introduced himself, but then Minta's version. He got off the trolley and he walked through the gates into the Keystone lot, the studio lot, and he wandered around looking for someone to show his portfolio to, but everyone was too busy. Minta said that he found everyone too busy to talk until a gray-haired, rumpled man scurried by with a mouthful of tobacco. As he spit out the juice, he shouted at Arbuckle, "Be here tomorrow at 8 o'clock," and he raced back inside his office. Roscoe laughed as the man, he thought he was a stock player, like an extra guy, and was playing a joke. And he wandered around the rest of the afternoon. He was about to leave when the same gray-haired man shot out of an office and said, "Be here at 8 tomorrow. You might be a star someday." The gray-haired man was Max Sennett. And Roscoe arrived the next day at 8 for work, and the rest, Minta said, is history. So closest to the truth, this is the story Roscoe tells. He got off at Effie Street at the Keystone lot. The guy on the car who told him about the Keystone job was Fred Mace, a Sennett comedian. Mace told Roscoe that Sennett's a madman and he pays lunatics good money to run wild in front of cameras. Roscoe liked the sound of that. And he'd be making money for having fun. So Mace took Roscoe in and introduced him to Mabel Normand. Mabel Normand, the great Mabel Normand. And she became Sennett's leading lady girlfriend on the screen. Not in real life, but on the screen. They made a bunch of movies, Roscoe and Mabel. Mabel and Roscoe, they're great. Anyway, at first Sennett said no. Roscoe looked too polished. He was very well dressed and very groomed, and Sennett was all dirty and tobacco juicy and gross. But Mabel talked him into it. Mabel had his ear, and she talked him into it. And he finally joined the Sennett studios April 16th, 1913. D.W. Griffith, the terrible racist who made the movie Birth of a Nation, glorifying the KKK, that guy, he had a company called Biograph. And that's where Sennett had gotten his start there. Griffith's wife said that Sennett was a loner and argumentative and not funny. That was her description of him. It sounds like he was pretty eccentric. He played dramatic roles, and he did not have the appearance of being a comic genius, which he did prove to be eventually. When the cast went doing things together, like off hours, they would go fishing or camping together, he went off alone with a book. He was kind of erratic. He would vacillate between being calm and angry. D.W. Griffith's wife often wondered about him behind his back. Was this cocaine? Because it was very popular. As she put it, it's very popular with a certain lower class. So he wasn't well liked. This is Max Sennett we're talking about. He was aloof and he complained a lot. He left D.W. Griffith's Biograph in 1912, and nobody was sorry to see him go. He had a flair for comedy. He'd been reading humor, and he knew how to direct comedy. He just had a talent for comics. He was aloof because his suggestions for adding humor were always rejected. So he was trying very hard to inject humor into some of D.W. Griffith's work, and he was treated poorly, and that's why he was aloof. He was odd. He had dead aim to the spittoon. I didn't even need to know that. His clothes never fit. He wore just the brim of a straw hat. He believed that sun on the top of your head prevented baldness. He wore just the brim. And in his office, he would take a Turkish bath. His office was at the top of a tower, and it had panoramic views of the entire lot. And he said it was so he could keep close watch so the kids won't goof off, is what he said. He was suspicious that everybody was out to cheat him and they weren't doing their full day's work. They were not working to earn the pay that he was paying. And for breakfast, he would have green radishes and onions, and he chugged shots of whiskey all day long. but he knew funny when he saw funny, and his movies were very funny. He spent hours watching the dailies, like they would film all day, and then he would watch these rough films and put them together. And he was his own best and worst critic. He had a very strong laugh reaction. When he liked something, he would just guffaw, and it was really encouraging to the cast. It kept people going. When they got no reaction, this was kind of a sign to them, uh-oh. He called himself an average working guy. He had no pretensions. No, we're talking Max Sennett. The Keystone lot had a front gate for visitors at the end of the streetcar line, and it had a side door for employees. And in 1913, in the center of the lot, there was one wooden stage with 3 exterior walls and muslin diffusers, they were called, muslin fabric, strung across the top horizontally to let the sun in for the cameras. And he got inspiration from the streets of Los Angeles. I love to watch these old silent films. Some of the Laurel and Hardy silent films are great for this. Many of them were shot on location. Sennett would pay homeowners $10 a day to shoot a movie in front of a house. And if they would allow him, he'd pay $15 to go onto their property, like mess around in their yard, and $25 to shoot inside the house. And you get to see what Los Angeles was like in those days. It was fascinating. Also, Keystone Cops driving down the street, they're doing all kinds of ridiculous stuff. Watch the street go by. Watch what Los Angeles looked like. I mean, I don't know. I have an affinity for this. It's incredible. He would give the homeowners, if they would let him, he would pay them to use their house, and then he'd give them a job as an extra, and he would pay them $1 a day and a studio box lunch. Word spread in Edendale, which became known as Glendale, and the homeowners advertised and sought out the studios. Hey, pick us. He was good at spotting talent. He hired geniuses, masters of their craft, but sometimes he didn't realize who he had till they left for other studios. He was kind of tight with the money. He made Harry Langdon a star. Harry Langdon was a big silent film comedian, not as well known today as maybe Charlie Chaplin, which I think he was overrated. I prefer Harry Langdon. I prefer oh God, what was his name? The guy with the straw hat and the glasses, Harold Lloyd. But Harry Langdon left Sennett in a dispute over artistic control and went on to make a lot of money for whoever hired him. Sennett lured Frank Capra as a gag writer, but he wouldn't let him direct. He gave Gloria Swanson a job. She was the first star to appear in a bathing suit for publicity stills. She went on to be the girlfriend of Joseph Kennedy. And he put her with comedic pratfalls. She was, I guess, good at it. She used him as a stepping stone to Paramount. He had Charlie Chaplin, whose name was really, is that right? No, Charlie Chase, who was a player and a gag writer and a unit director. He gave him 30 comedies he did in 3 years, but he didn't give him a raise, and he didn't let him be a permanent director. And this guy went on to be a great director and a great comedian of 2 reelers. He taught acting and directing to Charlie Chaplin, but he wouldn't give him money, more money. And so, you know, Charlie Chaplin left him too. Sennett was a hard taskmaster. He was hard on people. He demanded 100% loyalty. He considered leaving to be treason or traitors, and he never spoke to them again. He'd run into them in public and he wouldn't make eye contact. He was silent in social encounters and actually pretty rude. If you left for more money and went to greener pastures, he never got over it. In the book, Gene Fowler's Father Goose, Sennett was described as tenacious and forthright hater. Loyalty, however, won from him a never-failing friendship and affection. There was never any question where one stood with Max Sennett. He considered stars secondary to writers and script editors. He thought that was what really drove the comedy. Because a weak story, no actor could help. He worked on every story directly himself. He was involved in everything. Many stories started with ad-libs and free association. They kind of workshopped it, right there on stage, and then put it together. Also, he was a master of plagiarism. He sold biograph stories for $25. He sold them to Biograph. That's D.W. Griffith's studio. But he stole them from O. Henry, and there was a huge to-do about it, and he had to return the money. He borrowed, then he learned to borrow from foreign writers because it was harder for Americans to track down the source. Arbuckle did not like Sennett. Sennett was crude, slovenly, vulgar, and really awful around women. That wasn't Roscoe's jam. He was clean and groomed and beautifully dressed and impeccable manners and absolutely charming to women. And it was sincere. There was no subterfuge about it. He wasn't pulling the wool over anybody's eyes. And he just thought Sennett was disgusting. But Sennett paid Arbuckle $3 a day to do nothing, hoping he'd quit. He just said, here, I'm putting you on the payroll, but he didn't give him a role. Arbuckle encountered Henry Lehrman. Now, Henry Lehrman had Pathé Studios, eventually. At the time, he was a director for Sennett, and he was the director of Roscoe's first 3 Keystone movies. He actually started out in a Keystone Cops outfit. There's pictures in the book. Interestingly enough, he came back to haunt Roscoe. He was the boyfriend, this is Lehrman, was the boyfriend of Virginia Rapé, the young woman who died. Weird connection there. But a very small community. So Minta, Roscoe's wife, was resting her voice after 6 weeks of singing on stage. Roscoe tried to get her to work in the movies because she didn't have to have a voice. So after about a week, Sennett liked Roscoe's laugh, and he gave him a role in the movie The Gangsters. But, it's a silent film, but he just liked his demeanor. He convinced Mabel Normand, to get Sennett to hire Minta, and also Roscoe's nephew, Al St. John. This is his sister's son. Minta could still rest her voice, get paid, and then she planned to return to stage. Roscoe was in a very high mood. This was, a good time in his life. One-reelers were hard. They cranked out 3 a week. You had to know the plot and how to act and what was going on. You had to be aware of the script and change acting. And 3 times a week, you got a new movie. But also, it was like one big party. They had a great time. Sennett did not like Roscoe's performance in Gangsters. He told Mabel, you like him so much, you work with him. And they became co-stars in some of the most popular silent comedies ever. In his punishment, Sennett launched the huge comedy careers of Mabel Normand and Roscoe Arbuckle, and peripherally his own acclaim. Chapter 7. Because Roscoe had blonde hair and pale skin, Sennett wanted to replace him because he was hard to see on film. The technology wasn't great. It's kind of like right here. And because of his stage work, he overacted. Henry Lehrman, I can never say it, eventually the boyfriend of the girl who died, the director of Senate stuff. He didn't like Roscoe either. He complained to Senate that Roscoe had no comedic timing and did not listen to direction. Mabel coached him. Lerman refused to work with him unless he was ordered to, and Mabel became the go-between. And Lerman really was openly resentful of Roscoe. This depressed Roscoe. I can't read my handwriting. It caused conflict. Minta was happy because Roscoe liked a steady job, decent money, and the friends that he made, especially Mabel, he and Mabel were good pals. Minta's career was doing well too. She lucked out. The couple were getting on well. Roscoe stopped drinking. He developed some confidence and some self-esteem. And the question in the book is, were some childhood scars finally healing for him? July of 1913, he made A Noise from the Deep with Mabel. It was a one-reeler. Roscoe got Mabel to throw a pie. And the rest is history. This became a popular trope in silent movies. Roscoe was adept at trick throwing. He was called the greatest custard slinger of all time. Okay, hang on here. So back to Gene Fowler's book, Father Goose. He described Arbuckle as the greatest custard slinger of all time, the mightiest triple threat man, the all-American of all Americans, the supreme grand llama of the meringue, the Hercules of the winged dessert, the Ajax of the hurling fritter, the unconquerable and valiant flinger of open and closed minced models. Roscoe Arbuckle, when Fatty threw a pie, it stayed thrown. He could deliver a bake oven grenade from any angle, sitting, crouching, lying down with a good book, standing on one leg or hanging by his toe from a pergola. Ambidextrous, he could hurl two pies at once in opposite directions. Roscoe was also quick to give credit in part to Mexican bandito Pancho Villa, who unknowingly helped create film history during the river encounter several years before in El Paso, Texas. What a story. It's just hilarious. Local bakers grew rich because of the studio pie orders. There was so much pie throwing going on. Custard pies became the rage in all the Hollywood restaurants, and it spread across the country. Roscoe now got top billing. His first official starring role was Fatty's Day Off, and it is really funny, with Mabel Normand. It's very good. If I remember correctly, they go to this, I think they went to the Santa Monica Pier is where they ended up. I wouldn't swear to it. It might have been Long Beach, but I think it was Santa Monica Pier. And they had like a fun house and one of those whirligig things and slides and a bathhouse. It's really funny. Senate's Fun Factory, as the Keystone studio was called, was now higher than any studio for comedies because of the Keystone Cops and Fatty and Mabel is what they were called. Director Lerman lightened up a bit, but they never became friends. Roscoe was a favorite with children and adults equally. He was the major Keystone moneymaker. He was shocked. He stayed humble, it never went to his head. He was shocked to get fan mail, and he never really fully understood his popularity, especially with adults, and he was as shocked by it as he was later by the hate. Are you kidding? You really like what I'm doing? So why was he so popular? Was it because of his agility and athletic ability despite his size? Was it his innocent baby face? He was becoming who knows? He was becoming a household name. He was a 26-year-old star overnight success that had worked at odd jobs almost 20 years. Senate took full credit, of course. Roscoe actually was extremely athletic, and he remained the same weight no matter what he ate. It was a fluke of his metabolism. He would swim in the ocean a mile every day, and he ran every day, and he was a great dancer. He was now making $175 a week when the average pay was $5 a week. He was a very fancy dresser, and contrary to rumors, he hated gambling. He did not gamble. At this point, Roscoe replaced the top Keystone stars, and he got $200 a week. Then Chaplin signed on for a year, and he got from $150, he went up to $200 a week. He was received coolly by the crew and was even more disheveled than Mack Sennett was. His accent, because he's English, Chaplin, his accent was seen as pretentious. He was quiet and they just didn't trust him. Mabel was his leading lady and she hated him. She called him that English so-and-so. She had a big fight with Sennett. She refused to act with him. So Virginia Kirtley, and Minta were put opposite Chaplin instead of Mabel. Chaplin got on even worse with Lehman than Roscoe had. Lehman was jealous. Chaplin didn't understand how films were made and therefore how they were staged, and he didn't get how to shoot scenes out of sequence. He wanted to do what a stage show would do, chronologically, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. That's not really how things were done. And there was a lot of problems because he would put up a fuss. Lehman edited him down a lot, edited him out of movies a lot. But Chaplin got glowing reviews, and this is how Chaplin created the persona of the little tramp. He came to work, he was in desperate need of a costume for shooting a soapbox derby. And he grabbed a pair of Roscoe's pants that were too big, and he tied them up with rope. He took Minta's dad's too small hat, and Ford Sterling, one of the Keystone Cops, his size 14 oversized shoes, and the Keystone Cops shoes, he put them on the wrong feet. His coat was a prop belonging to Mabel, and he cut down a fake walrus mustache that belonged to one of the cops, Mac Swain, and he put it on with glue. And he found a cane in the corner and just grabbed that. It was impulsive. And this made him an instantly recognizable screen character. Mabel relented and acted with him, and they made Mabel's strange predicament. Chaplin fought with Lehman. Sennett said he had no choice. He sided with Chaplin. Lehman quit, and he joined the Ford Sterling film company. And he later released films from his own company, the Elco company, the Lehman Knockout. Roscoe seized the opportunity to direct his own comedies. Lehman's out of the picture. I'm going to volunteer to do my own. Sennett agreed, but Roscoe would be solely to blame if anything went wrong. So when he first started out at Keystone, one night he borrowed a camera. This is very clever. And he took it home. And he studied. He took it apart, studied how the lens reacted to light, how all the parts worked. He knew the technical part well. He understood the actual physical filmmaking. And he was able to use natural light and new camera angles that a lot of other people didn't think about. His films combined low comedy and high drama and romance. That was a secret combination. Sennett decided to make a 6-reel comedy, which was unheard of. 1 or 2 reels were the most. They called it Tilly's Punctured Romance. And from the stage, from the theater world, they brought Marie Dressler. And if you saw Marie Dressler, you would know she was this older woman. She was a little bigger. She had in real life she had a deeper voice, but you didn't know that in the silent film. Dressler was threatened by Roscoe's noticeable presence. She felt really upstaged by him. So she wanted to bar Roscoe from the cast of the movie. But Minta and Al, his nephew, Al St. John, they threatened to walk, and Senate, he needed them. So he ordered them to stay. Roscoe took the whole thing personally, and he took it out on Minta, and he withdrew that this Marie Dressler, who does she think she is treating me so poorly. He kind of withdrew. He began to work obsessively at night on staging for new films. So he was working for the future, but he also drank. And he always drew energy from the work. And he was absolutely a workaholic, but he was becoming an alcoholic. And we're going to stop here because we're at the end of a chapter, and I don't want to go too late into the next chapter. Where is my pen? Oh, here. So I hope you're enjoying this. I loved this book. I love this story. I'm fascinated by silent films. Sorry, you'll have to indulge my interests, but I'm hoping everybody's enjoying this. And the contrast between the first part of his life and the second part of his life is dramatic. I think you will be astounded by the story that you're going to hear. So thank you very much for watching. And just let me say that I really appreciate everyone who's joined my membership on YouTube or my membership on Substack. I am going to have a live on Sunday. I haven't picked a time yet. This is showing on Saturday. I'm recording early. I have to pick a time, but I have to check my schedule. So sometime in the afternoon Pacific on Sunday, watch for it. I'm going to try a live. Please forgive me if I mess it up. I practiced the other day and I messed it up, but I got advice from our dear friend Nate, so who's like Mr. Technology Extraordinaire. So we'll see what happens. I'm gonna take questions for the cards. So thank you for watching, and I'll be back with the rest of the story next Saturday, and Slán go fóill, slánte.